The wind screamed across the purple grass plains of Valdris 7, bending the strange vegetation almost flat against the ground. Park Ji-ho checked his weather scanner for the third time in 10 minutes, and the readings made his stomach clench. The storm was coming faster than predicted, and it would be bad. Really bad. He had been on this alien planet for 6 months now, studying the wildlife for Earth's xenobiology program. His small research station sat on the edge of a massive forest, and he had grown to love the solitude. Most days, anyway. Today was different. Ji-ho was packing emergency supplies into his shelter when he heard the sound. It was high-pitched and desperate, cutting through the howling wind. He froze, listening. There it was again. Something was crying out there in the growing darkness. Every instinct told him to seal the shelter and wait out the storm. The weather system approaching was classified as Category 5, with lightning strikes that could melt metal and winds strong enough to throw boulders. But that sound, it was the cry of something young and terrified. He grabbed his emergency kit and ran toward the noise. The purple grass whipped at his legs as he sprinted across the plain. The sky had turned an ugly green color, and the air felt heavy and electric. His scanner beeped frantically, warning him to seek shelter immediately. He ignored it. He found them huddled in a rocky outcrop, 3 small creatures pressed together against the stone. Ji-ho's breath caught in his throat. He knew exactly what they were. Felrax cubs, the offspring of the most dangerous predators on this planet. The same species that the Krethian Empire used as war beasts across the galaxy. The cubs were maybe 2 months old, covered in dark blue fur with silver stripes. Their 6 legs trembled as they cowered from the wind. Their mother was nowhere to be seen, and from the dried blood on the rocks, Ji-ho could guess what had happened. Territorial fight. The mother had lost. One of the cubs looked up at him with large golden eyes. It made that crying sound again, and something in Ji-ho's chest twisted painfully. He should leave them. Felrax were dangerous even as babies. Their claws could slice through steel, and their bite force was legendary. The Krethians spent years brutally training these creatures to follow commands. No one had ever simply befriended one. Thunder boomed overhead so loud it shook the ground. The cubs screamed in fear. Ji-ho made his decision. He slowly approached the cubs, making soft clicking sounds with his tongue. One of them hissed at him, showing needle-sharp teeth. But it was more afraid than aggressive. He could see that. Moving carefully, Ji-ho wrapped his jacket around the smallest cub and picked it up. It squirmed but didn't bite. The other 2 cubs watched with wide eyes. He picked up the second one, tucking it under his arm. The third and largest cub hesitated, then followed as Ji-ho started running back toward his shelter. The storm hit just as he reached the door. The world exploded into chaos. Lightning struck so close that Ji-ho's hair stood on end. The thunder was continuous now, a deafening roar that made thinking impossible. He shoved the cubs inside and slammed the door behind them just as something massive crashed into the side of his shelter. The lights flickered and died. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in red light. Ji-ho checked the damage on his control panel and felt his heart sink. The communications array was gone, ripped away by the wind. His emergency beacon had been crushed by falling debris, and the storm was only beginning. The cubs huddled together in the corner, making terrified noises. Ji-ho sat down slowly, trying not to startle them. He had just trapped himself in a small space with 3 predators, during what might be a multi-day storm. If they decided he was a threat, he was dead, but looking at their frightened faces, all he saw were scared children. He started talking to them softly in Korean, the language of his childhood. It didn't matter that they couldn't understand the words. The tone was what mattered. Calm, soothing, safe. The largest cub, the one with a white patch on its chest, crawled a little closer. Ji-ho stayed perfectly still. The cub sniffed his hand, its whiskers twitching. Then carefully it pressed its head against his palm. Ji-ho felt tears prick his eyes. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now. I've got you." The storm raged for hours. The shelter shook and groaned under the assault. More equipment failed. At one point, a support beam cracked and fell, missing Ji-ho by inches. Through it all, he stayed with the cubs, keeping them calm with his presence and his voice. By the second day, the cubs had accepted him. They still startled easily and sometimes snapped at each other, but they let Ji-ho touch them. He gave them names, needing to call them something. The brave one with the white patch became Dari. The cautious one with the darkest fur became Nabi. The smallest, who kept trying to play despite everything, became Bom. Jiho shared his food rations with them, though he wasn't sure what Velrax ate. They seemed to manage on the protein bars, crunching them up with their powerful jaws. They drank water from his emergency supply. On the third day, part of the roof tore away. Rain poured in and the temperature dropped dangerously. Jiho huddled with the cubs, sharing body heat. They pressed against him and he wrapped his arms around them. They were getting bigger already, growing at an alarming rate. Bom was almost the size of a large dog now. When the storm finally passed on the fourth day, Jiho assessed the damage. It was catastrophic. His communications were completely destroyed. The solar panels were gone. Most of his food supply had been contaminated by water. His medical scanner showed he had a fractured rib and severe bruising, though he didn't remember getting injured. He stepped outside into the eerie quiet. The landscape had changed completely. Trees were down everywhere. The purple grass was flattened and burned in patches from lightning strikes. His research station was barely recognizable. The cubs followed him outside, blinking in the sudden sunlight. Derry chirped and bounded ahead, exploring. Nabi stayed close to Jiho's leg. Bom immediately tried to climb a fallen tree and tumbled off with a yelp. Jiho looked up at the alien sky and laughed, though it hurt his ribs. He was stranded on a hostile planet with no way to call for help, limited supplies, and 3 rapidly growing predators that could kill him without effort. But somehow, looking at the cubs playing in the sunlight, he felt hope they would survive this together. The first week after the storm was brutal. Jiho woke each morning with his body screaming in pain from injuries he hadn't noticed during the crisis. His ribs throbbed with every breath. His hands were cut and blistered from repairing the shelter. But the cubs needed him, so he pushed through. Dari, Nabi, and Bom were growing at an incredible rate. What had been small enough to hold in his arms were now the size of wolves. Their appetites grew with them, and Jiho's rations disappeared faster than he could calculate. He needed to find food, and fast. The forest of Valdris 7 was dangerous, filled with creatures that saw humans as either prey or competition. But Jiho had spent 6 months studying this ecosystem. He knew which plants were edible and which streams had fish-like creatures. He knew where the herbivores gathered, and where the predators hunted. He just had never tried to hunt before. Jiho fashioned a spear from a broken support beam and a sharp piece of metal from his destroyed equipment. It was crude, but it was better than nothing. He left the cubs in the shelter with strict instructions to stay, though he had no idea if they understood him. They watched him leave with anxious eyes, and his heart ached at their worried chirps. The hunting was harder than he expected. The alien animals were fast and alert. His first 3 attempts ended with him returning empty-handed and exhausted. The cubs greeted him each time with obvious relief, pressing against him and checking him over with their noses. On the 4th day, he finally succeeded. A herbivore about the size of a deer had been drinking at a stream. Jiho's throw was lucky more than skillful, but the spear struck true. He dragged the carcass back to the shelter, and the cubs went wild with excitement. Dari was the first to tear into the meat, followed quickly by the others. They ate with the savage efficiency of natural predators. Jiho watched them, simultaneously fascinated and slightly disturbed. These were not pets. These were apex predators that could kill him in seconds if they chose. But when they finished eating, Dari brought him a chunk of meat in her jaws and dropped it at his feet. An offering, sharing the kill with the pack. Jiho felt something shift in his understanding. They didn't see him as a master or a food source. They saw him as family. The days developed a rhythm. Jiho would wake at dawn and check his injuries. His ribs were healing slowly, but wrong. Without proper medical care, they would probably never heal correctly. He ignored the pain and focused on what needed to be done. He hunted in the mornings while the cubs were less active. They were growing more confident each day, sometimes following him into the forest. Dari appointed herself as his guardian, always positioning herself between Jiho and potential threats. Nabi was the scout, ranging ahead to check the path. Bom brought up the rear, though she was easily distracted by interesting smells and sounds. Jiho taught them commands without really meaning to. Stay, come, quiet. He used hand signals along with words, and the cubs learned quickly, frighteningly quickly. Within days, they responded to his gestures even without sound. He also learned their language. The chirps, growls, purrs, and body movements all meant something. A low rumble meant contentment. A sharp bark meant danger. A certain tilt of the head meant curiosity. Jiho started responding in kind, mimicking their sounds. The cub seemed delighted when he got it right. 2 weeks after the storm, disaster struck again. Jiho was repairing the shelter's water filtration system when a support beam gave way. He had no time to dodge. The heavy metal struck his left leg and he heard the crack before he felt the pain. Then the pain hit like fire and he screamed. The cubs rushed to him immediately. Dari grabbed the beam in her powerful jaws and lifted it off him. Nabi pressed against his side, making anxious noises. Bomb ran in circles, not knowing how to help but desperate to do something. Jiho looked at his leg and felt his stomach turn. It was bent at an angle that was absolutely wrong. Broken badly. He needed medical attention he couldn't get. He was stranded on an alien planet with a broken leg, and 3 creatures depending on him for survival. He wanted to give up, to lie down and let the universe take him. It would be so much easier. Bomb licked his face, whining. Dari laid down beside him, her warm bulk pressed against his side. Nabi brought him water in a container she had somehow figured out how to carry in her mouth. Jiho took a shaky breath and started to laugh through his tears. He couldn't give up. They needed him. Using materials from his medical kit and parts from the shelter, Jiho made a splint for his leg. The pain was incredible, making him vomit twice. But he got it done. He couldn't walk properly, but he could hobble with a makeshift crutch. The cubs adjusted immediately to his injury. Dari stayed closer, supporting his weight when he stumbled. Nabi brought him things he pointed at, learning to fetch like the smartest dog in the universe. Bomb entertained him with her antics, seeming to sense when he needed distraction from the pain. Hunting became nearly impossible. Jiho couldn't move quietly or quickly enough on his broken leg. The cubs solved this problem themselves. They started hunting without him, bringing back kills to share. At first, Jiho was terrified they wouldn't return. But they always came back, often with concerned chirps, checking that he was still there. He set up a better camp outside the damaged shelter, a proper fire pit that he kept burning through the night. The cubs loved the fire, lying around it in the evenings. Jiho would sit with them, his injured legs stretched out, and talk to them about Earth, about his family, about his mother's garden and his father's terrible cooking, about the ocean and cities and things these alien cubs would never see. They listened with tilted heads and attentive eyes, as if they understood every word. One night, a predator approached the camp, something big drawn by the smell of their stored meat. Jiho reached for his spear, knowing he couldn't fight in his condition. But he didn't need to. All 3 cubs moved as one unit. Dari in the center, Nabi flanking left, Bomb flanking right. They made sounds he had never heard before, deep and terrifying. The predator took one look at the unified pack and fled. The cubs returned to the fire, looking pleased with themselves. Dari settled down with her head in Jiho's lap. He stroked her fur, marveling at the trust. A month after the storm, Jiho had accepted his situation. No one was coming. His supplies were nearly gone. His leg was healed wrong, leaving him with a permanent limp. He was malnourished and exhausted, but he had Dari, Nabi, and Bomb. They were thriving, growing larger and stronger each day. They hunted efficiently, protected the camp, and followed his commands perfectly. More than that, they loved him. It was obvious in every interaction, every gentle touch, every concerned look when he winced in pain. Jiho made toys for them from scrap metal and rope. He created training exercises that kept their minds sharp. He taught them to be careful with their strength around him. And every night he sang to them. Korean lullabies his mother had taught him, melodies that carried across the alien landscape. The cubs would curl around him, purring in harmony, and Jiho would forget for a moment that he was stranded and injured and alone, because he wasn't alone. Not really, he had a family. Commander Vexera stood on the bridge of his warship, studying the data with growing frustration. 3 royal bloodline Velrax cubs had been reported missing in this sector. The cubs were priceless, descendants of the War Marshal's personal breeding program. Losing them would be a disgrace that would follow him for the rest of his career. His second officer, Calvin, approached with the latest scan results. Commander, we have located the emergency beacon fragments. The human research station took significant storm damage. Vexra's armored hand clenched into a fist. Humans. weak creatures that had only recently joined the galactic community. They died easily, broke easily, and were useful for very little. The fact that one had been anywhere near Royal Velrax was offensive. Life signs? He demanded. Kelvin hesitated. One human. 3 Velrax juvenile stage but growing rapidly. The bridge went silent. Every member of the elite guard was thinking the same thing. How was a human still alive around 3 unsupervised Velrax? The most likely answer was that the human had done something to the cubs. Restrained them, perhaps. Or worse. Prepare a ground team, Vexra ordered. Full combat gear. If this human has harmed those cubs, he will answer for it. They landed under cover of darkness, 3 hours' march from the human's location. The elite guard moved through the forest like shadows, their superior night vision making the journey easy. They were the best warriors the Crethian Empire had to offer, chosen for their skill and their absolute loyalty. Vexra led from the front, as was proper for a commander. He had fought in 17 campaigns and earned his rank through blood and victory. He had personally trained Velrax for war, knew their savage nature, understood their violence. The idea that a human could survive around 3 of them without proper restraints was absurd. Kelvin raised his hand suddenly, signaling a halt. Sir, thermal readings ahead. Campfire, all 4 life forms in close proximity. Vexra activated his visor's long-range scanner. He could see the heat signatures now. 1 human-sized 3 Velrax. They were all gathered around a fire source. He zoomed in closer, trying to understand what he was seeing. The human appeared to be sitting upright, not restrained, not injured. The Velrax were arranged around him in a circle. They weren't attacking. They were just lying there. This makes no sense, Kelvin muttered. Velrax should have killed him immediately. Unless he has control technology we don't know about, Vexra suggested. Or chemical restraints. They moved closer, weapons ready. The forest opened into a clearing where the damaged research station stood. The campfire burned bright in the center of a small camp area. And there, just as the scanners had shown, sat the human with 3 juvenile Velrax around him. The human was thin, too thin. His leg was splinted and stretched out awkwardly. His clothes were torn and dirty. But his face was calm as he stared into the fire, and he was making sounds. Singing, Vexra realized. The human was singing. The translation software in his helmet picked up the melody and analyzed it. The language was Korean, an Earth dialect. The words spoke of stars and home and missing loved ones. The tone was sad but gentle. A lullaby. The 3 Velrax had their eyes closed, their heads resting on their paws. They looked peaceful. Content. Vexra had never seen anything like it. He signaled his team to spread out and surround the camp. They moved into position silently, weapons trained on the human. At his command they would strike. But Vexra found himself hesitating. Something about this scene felt wrong to disrupt. No, not wrong. Sacred somehow. One of the Velrax, the largest with a white patch on its chest, opened its eyes. Its head came up, nostrils flaring. It had detected them. The human stopped singing. What is it, Dari? He said softly in his language. The other 2 Velrax woke instantly, rising to their feet. They moved to surround the human, forming a protective barrier with their bodies. Their lips pulled back, showing teeth that could tear through armor. Low growls rumbled from their chests. They were protecting the human. Not threatening him. Protecting him. Vexra stood up from his concealment, knowing there was no point in hiding now. His team did the same, forming a circle around the camp with weapons ready. The human looked up at them, and Vexra was struck by the lack of fear in his eyes. The human looked tired and hurt, but not afraid. He raised his hand slowly in a gesture of peace. Easy, the human said, though he was looking at the Velrax, not the soldiers. They're not here to hurt us. The white-patched Velrax, Dari apparently snarled at that. She clearly disagreed. Vexra activated his translator and spoke in the human's language. I am Commander Vexra of the Crethian Elite Guard. Those Velrax belong to the War Marshal's bloodline. Explain how you have enslaved them. The human's eyebrows went up. Enslaved? I haven't enslaved anyone. I found them during the storm. Their mother was dead. I gave them shelter. Impossible, Kelvin said, stepping forward. Velrax cannot be tamed without years of brutal conditioning. They certainly do not protect their trainers. They obey through fear. The human looked sad at that. That's horrible, he said quietly. No wonder these 3 were so scared. They're not slaves, Commander. They're children who needed help. Dari made a sound, something between a growl and a whine. The human reached out and placed his hand on her head. Immediately she calmed, though her eyes remained fixed on Vexra. What is your name, human? Vexra asked. Park Jiho. I'm a xenobiologist from Earth. I've been studying the wildlife here. And the cubs' names? Dari, Nabi, and Bom. Jiho gestured to each in turn. The Velrax responded to their names, ears twitching. Vexra felt his certainty crumbling. He had expected to find a dead human or a human using illegal technology. Instead, he had found something impossible. 3 royal Velrax had bonded with a human, actually bonded like packmates. Show me your research logs, Vexra demanded. Show me how you did this. Jiho nodded and carefully stood up using a makeshift crutch. His injured leg clearly caused him pain. The Velrax moved with him, supporting his weight. He limped to the damaged shelter and returned with a datapad. Everything's on here, Jiho said, handing it over. Video logs, notes, medical scans. I recorded everything after the storm. Figured someone would eventually come looking. Vexra downloaded the data to his own device and started reviewing it. He watched footage of the storm, of Jiho finding the cubs, of the first terrifying days when the human didn't know if he would wake up with his throat torn out. He saw Jiho sharing his food, making toys, teaching commands with patience and kindness. He saw Jiho get injured by the falling beam, saw him set his own broken leg while screaming in agony, saw him continue to care for the cubs even when he could barely walk. The log showed progressive malnutrition. Jiho had been giving the cubs the larger portions of food, leaving himself with barely enough to survive. His medical scanner data was alarming. Broken ribs healed incorrectly. Fractured legs set improperly. Severe dehydration and vitamin deficiencies. The human had been slowly dying while keeping the cubs healthy and safe. Calvin looked over Vexra's shoulder at the data, and his expression shifted from suspicion to shock. He sacrificed his own welfare for them, the lieutenant said quietly. Why would he do that? Jiho was sitting by the fire again, the Velrax arranged protectively around him. He seemed unconcerned with the armed soldiers surrounding his camp. Vexra approached slowly, his weapon lowered. Why did you not prioritize your own survival? He asked. You are dying. You gave them your food, your resources, everything. Why? Jiho looked up at him, and in the firelight, Vexra could see how young the human was, and how exhausted. They were children, Jiho said simply. They needed someone. What else was I supposed to do? In that moment, Commander Vexra understood why humans were becoming significant in the galaxy despite their physical weakness. They had something most species did not. Something that made them dangerous and powerful in ways that had nothing to do with weapons or armor. They had hearts that would break themselves before allowing another to suffer alone. The tension in the camp remained high as the Creathian soldiers set up scanning equipment around the perimeter. Vexra had ordered his team to stand down from combat positions, but they kept their weapons close. Centuries of military doctrine had taught them that Velrax were dangerous, unpredictable, and required constant control through force. Watching these 3 cubs follow the injured human's gentle commands was breaking their understanding of reality. Calvin approached, Jiho with a medical scanner, his movements careful. Dari immediately moved between them, her lips pulling back in warning. Dari, no, Jiho said firmly. He's trying to help, friend. The Velrax hesitated, then slowly stepped aside, though her eyes never left Calvin. The lieutenant ran his scanner over Jiho's body, and his expression grew darker with each passing second. Commander, he called out, you need to see this. Vexra joined them and looked at the scanner display. The readings were worse than the research logs had shown. Jiho's body was in critical condition. The broken ribs had healed with fragments pressing against his lung. His leg bones had fused incorrectly, leaving him with permanent damage. His organs showed signs of severe malnutrition. He had infections in 3 different locations. How are you still conscious? Calvin asked, his voice filled with something like awe. Jiho shrugged, then winced at the movement. I don't have a choice. They need me. You are dying, Vexra stated bluntly. Without immediate medical intervention, you will not survive another week. I know, Jiho said quietly. I've known for a while now. But the cubs are doing well. They're strong and healthy. That's what matters. Bom, who had been exploring the soldiers' equipment with curiosity, suddenly bounded over and dropped a piece of dried meat at Jiho's feet. She looked up at him expectantly, tail wagging. Jiho smiled and picked it up. Thank you, Bomb. Good girl. He took a small bite, though eating clearly caused him discomfort. Vexra watched the interaction and felt something shift in his chest. This was wrong. All of his training, all of his experience told him that what he was seeing was impossible. Velrax did not care for their handlers. They obeyed because they feared punishment. They were weapons, not companions. But these 3 cubs were not weapons. They were children who loved the person who had saved them. I do not understand, Vexra admitted, sitting down across the fire from Jiho. Our handlers train Velrax from birth. It takes years of discipline and often pain to earn their obedience. You have had these cubs for less than 2 months and they would die for you. How? Jiho was quiet for a moment, watching the fire. Nabi had curled up beside him, her head resting on his uninjured leg. I didn't train them, he finally said. I just took care of them. I talked to them, played with them, made sure they felt safe. That's not training. That's just being family. Family, Calvin repeated the word like he was tasting it. You consider yourself their family? They consider me theirs, Jiho corrected. I'm just the lucky human who gets to be part of their pack. One of the soldiers, a young warrior named Taman, had been listening intently. He stepped forward, his posture respectful but confused. Sir, permission to speak? Vexra nodded. I trained with Velrax at the military academy, Taman said. They taught us that Velrax are naturally aggressive, that their instinct is to dominate or kill. We had to show them we were stronger, more dangerous. Many trainees died during bonding attempts. Are you saying that was wrong? Jiho looked at the young soldier with sympathy. I can't speak for adult Velrax who have been raised in that system. Maybe they do become aggressive and dangerous because that's all they've known. But these 3? They were babies when I found them, scared and alone and hurt. They didn't need someone to dominate them. They needed someone to love them. Dari lifted her head and made a soft chirping sound. Jiho reached out and scratched behind her ears, and the massive predator closed her eyes in contentment. Love, Vexra said, testing the word. In Krethian culture, love was something reserved for mates and offspring. It was not something given to animals or weapons. You love them? Of course, Jiho said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. How could I not? They're amazing. Intelligent, loyal, brave. Ba makes me laugh every day with her antics. Nabi always knows when I'm in pain and tries to comfort me. Dari appointed herself as my protector and takes her job very seriously. He smiled at the white-patched Velrax. They're my family now. I would do anything for them. Calvin exchanged a glance with Vexra. Both warriors had seen countless battles, had faced death without fear, had done terrible things in service to their empire. But this human, simple declaration of love for 3 alien predators was somehow the most courageous thing either had witnessed. The cubs must return to Krethian space, Vexra said, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. They are of royal bloodline. The War Marshal will want them back. Jiho's face went pale, but he nodded. I understand. They deserve a proper home, not a damaged research station with a crippled human. Just promise me you'll be kind to them. Please, they've been through enough. Dari must have sensed Jiho's distress because she immediately stood up, pressing against his side. Nabi and Bomb joined her, and all 3 cubs surrounded their human, making anxious sounds. Easy, Jiho whispered, his voice breaking. It's okay. You're going home. But it wasn't okay, and everyone there knew it. The cubs had imprinted on Jiho as their pack leader. Separating them would cause psychological damage that might never heal. And Jiho, despite his brave words, looked like something inside him had shattered. Taman spoke up again, his voice urgent. Commander, we can't separate them. Look at the cubs. They're already in distress just from sensing his emotions. If we take them by force, they might never recover. And the human will die without medical treatment, Calvin added. His condition is critical. Vexra stood up and walked away from the fire, his mind racing. He was a soldier, trained to follow orders and protocol. The protocol was clear. Retrieve the cubs, return them to the War Marshal, file a report about the human's illegal contact with royal bloodline Velrax. But protocol had not anticipated this situation. Protocol did not account for a human who would sacrifice everything for creatures he barely knew. Protocol did not explain how 3 savage predators had become gentle children around someone who showed them kindness instead of fear. He looked back at the camp. Jiho was hugging all 3 cubs now, whispering to them in his language. The cubs were making sounds Vexra had never heard from Velrax before. Not growls or snarls, but something almost like crying. Commander Vexra had made many difficult decisions in his military career. He had ordered soldiers to their deaths, had destroyed enemy positions knowing civilians might be caught in the crossfire, had done what was necessary for victory even when it cost him sleep for years afterward. This decision should have been easy. Follow protocol, complete the mission, return home. But looking at that human and those cubs, Vexra realized that easy and right were not always the same thing. New plan, he announced, returning to the fire. His soldiers turned to look at him with surprise. The human comes with us. We provide medical treatment and return him to health. The cubs stay with him during this process. Sir? Kelvin looked confused. The War Marshal will see 3 healthy royal bloodline Velrax with an unprecedented bond to their handler, Vexra interrupted. He will see an opportunity. Humans have shown us something we did not know was possible. Perhaps it is time we learned from them. Jiho looked up, hope dawning in his exhausted eyes. You mean, you will accompany us to Crethean space, Vexra said firmly. You will receive medical treatment, and you will stay with those cubs. But understand this, human. You will also explain your methods to our handlers. You will teach us how you achieved what we thought impossible. I can do that, Jiho said quickly. I can help. Thank you, Commander. Thank you. Vexra nodded once, then turned to his team. Prepare for transport. The human is too injured to walk far. We will carry him if necessary. Dari stepped forward and lowered herself to the ground beside Jiho. She looked at him expectantly. Jiho laughed, tears streaming down his face. You want to carry me? He carefully climbed onto her back, his injured legs stretched out awkwardly. Dari stood up slowly, careful not to jostle him. The elite guard stared in absolute shock as a royal bloodline Velrax willingly became a mount for a human. Not through force or fear, but through choice and love. Commander Vexra looked at his soldiers and saw his own wonder reflected in their faces. Perhaps humans were not so weak after all. I am War Marshal Tayrok, the old warrior's voice boomed across the platform. You are the human who dared to touch what belongs to my bloodline. Jiho bowed respectfully as Vexra had taught him. I am Park Jiho of Earth. I found your cubs orphaned and dying. I gave them shelter and care. If that was wrong, I apologize. But I would make the same choice again. Tayrok stepped forward and Jiho forced himself to stand still as the massive Crethean loomed over him. Dari growled low in warning, ready to defend her human. You presume to teach these cubs loyalty? Tayrok demanded. No, sir, Jiho replied. They taught me. I just listened. The War Marshal stared at him for a long moment, then made a gesture. 2 handlers approached with an adult Velrax on heavy chains. The beast was scarred and aggressive, snarling at everyone around it. This is how our Velrax are, Tayrok said. Weapons dangerous, requiring constant control. Your cubs are not yet grown. When they mature, they will become this. Savage and uncontrollable without force. Jiho looked at the chained Velrax and felt his heart break. The creature was terrified and angry, lashing out because it had been taught that violence was the only language it knew. With respect, War Marshal, that Velrax is what your training made it, Jiho said carefully. It could have been different. It still could be. You think you can reform this beast? Tayrok gestured to the snarling Velrax. I think I could help it remember what it was before you taught it to hate, Jiho replied. The crowd murmured at his boldness. No one spoke to the War Marshal like that. But Tayrok smiled, a fierce expression that showed many teeth. Then prove it. You have 1 month. If you can reform this broken weapon into what you claim is possible, I will accept your methods. If you fail, you will leave Crethean space and never touch our Velrax again. Jiho looked at the scarred, angry creature, and then at Dari, Nabi, and Bomb. 1 month to undo years of trauma and abuse. It seemed impossible. But he had done impossible things before. I accept your terms, Jiho said. The next month was the hardest of Jiho's life. The adult Velrax, who he named Hanul meaning sky, was aggressive and dangerous. It took weeks just to get close without being attacked. Jiho used everything he had learned with the cubs, moving slowly, speaking softly, never showing fear. Dari, Nabi, and Bomb helped in unexpected ways. They would approach Hanul and demonstrate calm behavior, showing the traumatized adult that not all interactions with others had to end in violence. Slowly, painfully slowly, Hanul began to change. The snarls became less frequent. The attacks stopped entirely. One day, 3 weeks into the training, Hanel approached Jiho and pressed its head against his hand. The watching handler stood in shocked silence. When the month ended, Jiho stood before Tyrock again. Hanel walked beside him without chains, calm and responsive. The war marshal watched as Jiho put the Velrax through commands using only gestures and soft words. "You have proven your point," Tyrock said finally. "We have been wrong for generations. Our methods created weapons when we could have created allies." He stepped down from his platform and approached Jiho directly. "I offer you a position. Stay here. Teach our handlers your ways. Help us reform our programs. And keep those cubs. They are yours now. You earned them." Jiho felt tears spring to his eyes. "I accept, War Marshal. On one condition. I also want to help establish better relations between humans and Krethians. We could learn a lot from each other." Tyrock extended his hand and Jiho shook it. The crowd erupted in cheers. 6 months later, Jiho sat in his quarters on the Krethian homeworld, reviewing reports on the reformed Velrax training program. The changes were spreading throughout the Empire. Fewer handlers were dying. The Velrax were healthier and more effective. Most importantly, they were treated with respect instead of fear. Dari had grown to full size now, massive and powerful, but she was still gentle with Jiho, still watched over him like the protective sister she had become. Nabi was his scout, always alert and intelligent. Bomb still made him laugh with her playful antics, though now she could accidentally knock over small buildings. A message came through from Earth. The xenobiology team wanted his consultation on another impossible bonding situation. Some species on a distant world that everyone said could not be approached. Jiho smiled and looked at his 3 Velrax. "Want to go on another adventure?" Dari chirped in agreement. Nabi tilted her head, curious. Bomb bounced excitedly, knocking over a chair. Vexra appeared at his door, having been assigned as permanent liaison between Jiho and the military. "Another mission?" "Looks like it," Jiho said. "Apparently word has spread about what humans can do." "Humans can do what others think impossible," Vexra said with something that might have been a smile. "You have taught us that. You took 3 orphaned cubs and created a family. You reformed a broken weapon into a trusted companion. You bridged 2 species that had no reason to trust each other." "I just listened," Jiho said, "and cared. That's all it takes sometimes." Outside his window, the sun was setting over the Krethian capital. 2 species that had once been strangers were now working together, learning from each other. And it had all started with a human who refused to leave 3 frightened cubs alone in a storm. Jiho gathered his gear and his family. There were more beings out there who needed someone to listen, to care, to bridge the impossible gaps between species, and he would be there with Dari, Nabi, and Bomb by his side, ready to prove that sometimes the strongest bond is not forged through force, but through the simple choice to help when someone needs it most. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Jiho was excited to face them.